Over the course of the last few years, one phrase has become increasingly popular, and synonymous with lazy gaming journalism. That phrase being, "it's like Dark Souls," which despite being ridiculed as a meme in recent times is still widely used. This is a shame because there are games that do legitimately try to be like Dark Souls, such as Nioh, The Surge, or the upcoming Code Vein, making it hard to describe those games as Souls-like, because people often associate that language with the same type of articles calling a game like Crash Bandicoot Dark Souls. But why are people doing this? Why are we seeing Crash Bandicoot called Dark Souls? Well, if we look at these articles, in the case of both Crash Bandicoot and Cuphead, the comparison is attributed to these games' difficulty. But in the case of something like Nier Automata, it was compared to Dark Souls because of its corpse running mechanic. And another example, Sea of Thieves, it was because of its environmental storytelling. While these elements exist within Dark Souls, and you could say they are a core part of it, these elements singled out are not what makes Dark Souls. Hell, most of these things were already tropes by the time Demon Souls, Dark Souls' predecessor, came around. For example, when Dark Souls was released, there were a ton of difficult games already on the market, but the difficulty alone was not what made Dark Souls stand out. It was the way it respected the player's intelligence by letting go of their hands, and requiring them to figure out the game on their own, combined with its tough gameplay. That's what made Dark Souls and Demon Souls special, yet this somehow turned into every game with an intense difficulty to being just like Dark Souls, no matter the reason for why said game is difficult. Something similar could be said for the corpse run mechanic. While being a relatively minor part of the game, it has been used surprisingly often as a way to draw uninspired comparison to Souls. While Dark Souls might have been the game that popularized it, this feature even back in 1999 had existed within games like EverQuest. Dark Souls took a different approach in that it used the mechanic within a single player game, unlike the MMOs before it, but the mechanic should not be attributed to Dark Souls. Another one of Dark Souls' core features that is common reason for comparison is the combat system. Unlike many other action RPGs, it plays out much slower and without too many crazy combos or special moves. Now, the roots of the system undeniably come from Ocarina of Time, being one of the first to utilize Z-targeting and the first to really popularize it. But to me, it seems like Dark Souls owes a lot of its combat system to the early Monster Hunter titles as well. Both series require you to commit to every move you make. As I said before, the combat is rather slow, and if you poorly time an attack or a heal, it could easily spell death. Both also feature rather similar systems of stamina management, with Dark Souls simply deciding to apply it more to your moves. These systems aren't exactly the same, and with time they evolved in different ways, but the similarities are there. As you can see, what elements are attributed to being Dark Souls are just pieces of it, and on their own are simply not what makes Dark Souls. An entire game is greater than the sum of its parts. It's not just Dark Souls' difficulty, its unconventional methods of storytelling, or its slow combat mechanics. It's about how it combines these aspects with many other elements. I somewhat mentioned this earlier already, but the obtuse mechanics and high difficulty serve to give the player a sense of satisfaction that many modern games are missing. Without the help of a map or any clear indication of where exactly to go during most times, every new bonfire or shortcut found can be a huge relief, because learning the way through the area can be just as nerve-wracking as fighting a boss. You can never really know what to expect when you walk around the corner. It could be a swarm of enemies, a cool new weapon, or a path to an entirely different area. Something similar could be said for the bosses. When you walk through that fog door, you never know what's coming. Some are simply tests of your skill, while some are more gimmicky and are best fought with specific strategies. It simply feels good to many of us when we overcome any of these challenges because the game doesn't seem to care whether we beat them or not.
Oh my fucking god! We're done! Jesus Christ.
Then of course there's the lore and story, an aspect that not every player necessarily cares about, but the same idea applies here as well. Dark Souls doesn't care if you have any clue what's going on in its world or not, but puzzling parts of it together can feel very rewarding. However, no one person can be expected to figure all of this lore and gameplay information out on their own. The game expects players to exchange their findings online to put the bigger picture together. In a sense, every Souls game is kind of an ARG, intended to be solved by the entire community. This idea is further reinforced by the in-game system that allows you to leave hints for other players, but at the same time, that doesn't mean a game needs to be built in exactly this kind of way. You can deviate from the formula some, whether in big or small ways. Bloodborne is not exactly a Souls game and diverges from them in more than one way, but because it still follows most of the same core principles, it's often even lumped together with the rest of From Software's other Souls games. Other developers even have picked up on the same ideas and add their own spin to them to make them stick out. Nioh fundamentally plays the same as Souls, despite its different combat stances, special moves, and other minor differences. It's very obviously emulating a large portion of the formula, which is why I believe it deserves the description Souls-like. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that a game has to stick so closely to warrant a comparison to Dark Souls. For example, 2017's Hollow Knight takes clear inspiration from Dark Souls, in the way it builds its world's atmosphere and aesthetic, as well as how it approaches difficulty, especially with its bosses. Hollow Knight even has mechanics similar to Dark Souls in it, such as the save point system, the benches, functioning akin to bonfires in Souls, and again including that corpse run mechanic we mentioned earlier. But it's not the fact that it just has one or two similar mechanics, it's very clearly trying to translate a lot of Souls features onto a different type of game. So what I'm saying is, not all comparisons of Dark Souls are necessarily unwarranted. For example, What Culture calling Monster Hunter World Dark Souls mixed with Jurassic Park actually does have some truth to it. And perhaps it being so heavily mocked despite this proves my point earlier that you just can't make this comparison without being laughed at this point. I honestly do think this description has some weight for Monster Hunter World, though the title clearly strives to be as clickbaity as possible, as well as taking advantage of YouTube's algorithms by including the name of two popular brands. These choices were done specifically so people will click on it. It's admittedly a lazy, shallow way to get clicks, which might be the reason those articles don't stop. Whether it's bad publicity or not, something being compared to Dark Souls is going to be shared and thrown around like crazy nowadays. It's probably the exact reason you clicked on this video.